Hey everyone, welcome back to Winden. Today we're going to be working on filling in this piece of land here on the opposite side of the tracks as we more or less finish the city as it is in 1986. So to start off, we are going to be updating and expanding the train station here. And as you can see, I really only just placed the exact same station down, but just didn't convert it to procedural objects, since that is what I did for the station in 1986. With this particular asset, when you convert it to PO, the top two train platforms just disappear. So it makes the station look much smaller, and it provides a really easy way of, just making the station look like it was expanded, right? So I can add those additional platforms and tracks without really, having to do much work. So it's a very easy way to do that, and I, planned that out when I was testing out different stations to use, and I like this one since it does, look as though it still has, history to it, right? The entrance is a nice older building, so I like to keep that and just, apply some few things here and there that make it look as though it was updated with a few more, modern things. Another thing I wanted to do here was update the tracks to, or I should say upgrade, not necessarily update, but I guess both, but update them to the concrete sleepers rather than the wooden sleepers. So I know that, at least from what I can gather looking at maps and stuff, and just like, Google Maps in general, looking at the rails and stuff, it seems as though it makes more sense, and at least I should say I assume that the tracks were updated, or at least any new tracks were built had concrete sleepers, since of course, it makes sense, much more longevity out of concrete versus wood. But also, more importantly, really, was just to draw out the detail in the tracks, since unfortunately in the game, the wooden sleepers, unless you have a very light gravel texture, the sleepers and really also just the rail itself blend in too well with the gravel, so it's hard to see, and you just kind of lose the detail. You miss out on that. So having the much brighter, kind of that white textured concrete, it's much more easier to notice and see. So I definitely like that. Another thing worth mentioning is, as you can see here, there are a couple tracks that terminate, right? So if you're to actually count the number of platforms that are through, allow trains to go through versus the ones that terminate, it'd be 4 that allow you to go through and 3 that terminate at this station. So this is one thing I didn't really want to do, but it just kind of happened, just how, I have the city laid out with the rows and such. If you look right here where I placed this Mercedes dealership, you see that the traffic would be really screwed up if I allowed those train tracks to continue. And it would have been really possible to funnel all those tracks down to a single track. So I just kind of made the decision to just allow those to terminate at the station there. So I don't think it's the most realistic thing. From what I know and what I've learned when it comes to German train stations and such, that it seems as though really no terminal stations were built after World War II. At least I've heard that. I don't know if it's completely true, or at least maybe it's probably more of a general statement. There's always going to be exceptions to general statements like that. So hopefully, this can be one of those exceptions in which when the station was updated, maybe sometime in the mid-50s, early 60s, that they, for whatever reason, decided to build some terminal lines rather than just allow it to go straight through. But more so for me when I was building it, as I already said, I did it mostly just to avoid a really, really nasty traffic jam on that one side, since on the other side, the train tracks actually go under a bridge. So, that's much more ideal, but unfortunately I couldn't really do it on the other side, so I just ended up with the terminal tracks instead. So moving on from that, like I said, it was a pretty quick update to the station, and I wanted to add a dealership to, this area. I didn't want to do just completely industrial, warehouse type stuff. I wanted to have some more, typical things that, the average person could use. So I also put an office, I think I placed already, to the right there. And, so the Mercedes-Benz dealership asset here was pretty modern, I think. So, that's a little downside to it, but I'm not really sure of any, dealership assets on the workshop that would have, fit in the 1980s. So, I thought about adding, some bland walls to it, just network walls to make it look less modern, maybe covering up some of the really large glass windows, but I didn't think it was too much of a big deal. So I pretty much just left it there as is. But yeah, I kept it pretty simple nonetheless. Mostly focusing on that little area there that for cars, I guess, to go to, dropping off your car to be serviced or whatever. And as you saw, I'm not subscribed to any white lines, like decal lines. So I had to use one of the parking lot lines that have the multiple lines on it and just convert it to PO and then just basically, smush it so all it shows is the straight white line, which works for the most part. Unfortunately, there is one downside, which is at certain angles, which you might have saw already, the parts of the area that were cut off when I converted it to PO and reshaped it, they still kind of show. So that's kind of a unfortunate thing. Of course, the easy solution would have been just to subscribe to white lines, but yeah, I totally forgot, and multiple times I forgot because I meant to subscribe to those several times. So at the end, I just figured, yeah, whatever, I'll just do that and convert it to PO. It's fine because I actually use that somewhere else as well. But so here is where I start to add some of the more warehouses. So when I say I wanted to add industry, I mean more warehouse type stuff. Especially this one right here. This is obviously a warehouse, just probably distribution center, something like that. Maybe once we progress the city to the modern era, I'll maybe slap on a Amazon sign on the side or something like that. But for now, I just kept it unlabeled. It's whatever you want it to be. But once again, I know I said in the previous episode that I was done using these parking lots, but then I forgot about this area that we needed to build. And, like I said, I thought a dealership made sense. So of course, I had to make the parking lot for all the cars, which I do eventually add. I forgot to do that when I was recording for whatever reason. Of course, a dealership needs cars to sell. So I obviously go back afterwards to add some cars that are parked out for the ones that are being sold. But yeah, so once again, using these roads, I've already said how much I like them, so I won't talk about that again. But yeah, so I guess one thing to talk about is, I kind of mentioned at the very beginning, that we're kind of wrapping up 1986 version of the town. So really, there's not much more to do. So I'm kind of tempted to say that this is definitely going to be the last episode for the 1986 version of the town before we progress to the modern day. But I'm really not certain on that. I might come up with some other ideas. And also, I believe it was episode 4, which is when we wrapped up the town in 1953. A lot of you gave some really good ideas that I definitely want to add to the town. So, if it's enough for an episode, I'll do it. Otherwise, I might just do some of it off camera. But also, a lot of those ideas aren't necessarily something that have to be, built in 1986 version of the town. Some of those things can definitely be in the modern day version, since, I of course need content for that. I don't want it to just be, one episode of just modernization or anything like that. So yeah, at this point, I really haven't made up my mind as to whether or not I'm going to do another episode in 1986. So, really it just depends on you guys if you want to see another episode in 1986 before we move on to modern day. And of course, that depends on ideas. So yeah, if you want to see another episode in this time period, in the 80s, then leave some recommendations as to what you want to see built. So anything 80s theme, or anything, actually not just necessarily 80s, but anything between 1953, which is when the first 2 episodes took place, and 1986. So anything during that 33-year period is something I could build. So yeah, give me your ideas, and we will see about whether we'll have another episode in 1986 or not. So moving on, I'm kind of sporadic right here, detailing these different things. As you can see, I didn't really detail those warehouses right away. I'm moving on to, or I should say more or less coming back to this office building here. And, we of course all have our own ways we like to build, different strategies and such, different levels of detailing and whatever it may be. And sometimes when I'm building in some more weirdly shaped areas, such as this, which is wedged between these train tracks here and the highway, and kind of a very, very long piece of land here with not a lot of space to add much. So I more or less just wanted to get a feel of where all the buildings are, the spaces between them, the space behind it. So I wanted, that's more or less, I guess, why. It's not something that I'm really consciously thinking. It just more or less happens. Just kind of all the fun ways that we build the stuff that we build. But I guess another thing that I wanted to mention, since I actually somehow forgot to say something in the past 2 episodes, which I meant to, and at least I remember this time around. But that thing is, I was unable to do the copy and pasting that I mentioned I wanted to do for this series. So if you don't know what I mean by that, what I mean is I originally had the idea, which I discussed in the very, very first episode, that I wanted to copy and paste the town a total of 3 times on the same map. So the first time would be in the town in 1953, then I would copy that, rotate it appropriately so it's kind of facing a central point where the caves are, and that would be 1986. And then once I finished that, I would copy that, rotate it again, and then I would build the modern day. So basically the idea was to have all 3 time periods on the exact same map leading to a central location, which are the caves. And if you're confused why they have to be caves, then that's all based on the show Dark, which I won't get into. But so I was unable to do that, which I kind of had an idea, since I mentioned already that I don't know which tree it is, or several trees that I'm using, but they're most definitely not FPS friendly. They are in fact very un-FPS friendly, and I love all the trees I'm using, their appearance. So I didn't really want to go through and be disappointed in a certain tree or two that maybe might be my favorite that are really causing performance issues. So I decided just to ignore that idea, since when I did actually attempt to do it, I highlighted everything in the city, and my game froze for like 15 minutes. So I was like, forget that. I considered maybe just filtering it, so just copying the networks first, and the buildings and the trees, and blah blah blah, all that. But that would have been a huge hassle, and probably unless I would have to have laid everything perfect. Otherwise, things would have been not placed in the right location. I would have had to have fixed a lot of things. Not to mention, all these surface painted areas would not have transferred either, which I didn't think of originally either. So there's several reasons not to do that. So it's a little bit of a bummer. However, it's going to work out, because almost better in the sense that I'm going to be able to do a side-by-side comparison in a cinematic video much easier, since I'll just, whatever cinematic paths that I want to take, right, if you've used the cinematic camera mod, then you select the 2 points that you want to move between, and the camera just the mod just does the rest, and it remembers that. So when you exit and reload the game the next day or whatever, the mod remembers the path that you previously did. So what I should be able to do is go into each save, since I of course have a separate save for 1953 and then now 1986, and then of course the final modern day. So I'll have a total of 3 saves, and I should be able to go into each one individually and just do all the cinematic camera shots, and it'll give the exact location with the exact positioning of the camera. So I'll be able to do some nice comparisons of every location side by side in the cinematic videos, which will come at the very end when we wrap up the series. So in the end, I would say it worked out maybe even better. Really, the only benefit of having everything on the same map would have been just kind of cool for those that would have access to the save game. If you wanted to build each city to however you'd like, mess around with the different periods and such, which would have been cool. So as I said already, it more or less worked out better this way, but I did at least want to let you guys know in case any of you were wondering how that all went. But so moving on to something I've been wanting to do for really the longest time, and that is use this mod, the intersection marking tool. Is that it? I honestly don't even know the name of the mod, and that's because I've never had the opportunity to use this mod. You know, building in Berlin Noir, of course, there weren't any super fancy intersections with a bunch of lines all over the place and things like this. So now that we are in this series, and in the 1986, which is fairly modern, I definitely wanted to make some fancy intersections and also expand this one road that went along the train station there, which just a simple upgrade from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road. Nothing too much there. But the big thing was, of course, just going to be messing around with this mod, which I'm sure pretty much everyone, or I should say anyone who plays City Skylines modded, then I'm sure you've all used this mod once before. I mean, it's of course I see this all the time on Reddit, people making kind of insane intersections, many just lines going every which way, which probably I don't think is very realistic. I think they're just having a lot of fun playing around with it because it obviously looks cool. But yeah, I'm just messing around with it, finally getting the opportunity to use it, since it's pretty straightforward if you happen to have not used it before. You just kind of connect the lines like that and select the type of line, so whether you want it to be dashed or the double line or double dash, whatever you want, and adjust the width, the space between them, whatever it is. But the more harder things is adding rules, which you might see in that little box on the left. It'll have an option to add a rule, and it's kind of hard to explain since I'm not doing it currently on screen. But basically, it's just to add points that aren't currently there. So if you want to add a point between two lines, you have to, where they intersect, where two lines intersect, you can add a rule which will allow you to have an additional point there, so then you can make the whatever you want. So like having concrete or grass, a little piece of something like that in the middle of your road or something like that, you have the opportunity to do that, which that's where it can be a little more tricky and where I had a little difficulty. But other than that, like I said, it's definitely a pretty straightforward mod. And yeah, so this is pretty much the only cool looking intersection in the city as of now. The one, or I should say the next intersection that has, I did actually do something like this off camera when I was practicing, and that's by the area that we built previously in the previous episode, by the office and retail area. There's a little intersection there that I messed around with some of the lines and stuff. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't having a bunch of skips, in the video. I wanted to mostly make it just a continuous thing, so I'm not having to edit out a bunch of things and the video's not jumping all over the place, since that's a little harder to watch. But of course, the next, you can't forget, I should say, to use Traffic Manager to connect all the lines to make sure the cars are going where the lines, suggest they should be going. So yeah, otherwise, of course, your cars are just going to ignore the lines and drive wherever the vanilla road, lets them. And lastly here, just adding a very large crosswalk, just since, it's right next to the train station there, so I figured realistically there'd be a lot of people walking around, and for the most part, as you see, there's a very, very long line of people going to the right side of the screen, and that's them going towards some bus stops, which is right there at the right side. That's something that I'll probably, or not probably, I will update, make a little nicer once we get to the modern day. And then also the train shed, which is along the train tracks there by the station. That's also something I kind of have a cool idea to do with, which I guess I won't say, keep it a surprise since I'm not really sure I'll be able to do it or not, but probably will be. So yeah, expect that as something cool with that in the modern day. So to wrap up today's episode, we're going to be finishing with a truck stop. So the truck stop is going to be located on the opposite side of the highway, so not on the side of the highway with the town or anything. So, kind of far outside the town, but still along the highway, since of course trunks would need to be able to access it pretty easily. And in case you're wondering when the highway was built, since I didn't actually include that in any of the episodes, I just did that off camera recently, since I figured it made sense to have a highway coming somewhat close to the town, but also, or I should say really more so, was just to help with the general just congestion and traffic in the city, since the game's not really meant to have a town not be connected to a highway. So when just a bunch of little small two-way roads are leading in and out of a town, the traffic can get a little bad. So the highways definitely solve that. The smaller roads are definitely not nearly as congested, so I'm definitely glad I did that. But yeah, so this truck stop is based on a location in Dark. It's not a super important location, it's not shown too much, but nonetheless, you know, it's something I wanted to include. And since up to this point in the episode, I haven't built anything based on the show. So yeah, I wanted to include something in this episode from Dark. So this is what it is. And actually, the location used in the show is actually the previous checkpoint Bravo, which is between Berlin and Potsdam, which I think now it does function as a truck stop, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, so I didn't really reference that actual location when building this at all. I just kind of looked at generic truck stops across Germany, which, and you know, in all honesty, they kind of look just like the type of truck stops in the US as well. Although I would say in the US, they're not really considered truck stops as much as they are considered rest stops, since they have a lot more amenities here in the US because they accommodate also just your average driver. So like, for instance, I live in Arizona, and when going to California, I would, you know, there'd be several opportunities, 3 or 4 opportunities to stop at a rest stop, you know, to go to the bathroom, or some, you know, maybe you got to blow up your tires if your tires are running low, anything like that. So yeah, they're a little more used for just average people traveling between states. So I don't, based on how they look in Germany, it doesn't seem as though they're really meant for that. It looks like they're meant more so for just trucks. But yeah, I did include those small parking spaces up there in the corner, since, you know, I couldn't really fit anything else there. So I figured, you know, just some small parking spaces in case, you know, someone traveling between cities or something, just to need a little stopper to rest or whatever it may be. But I did, of course, want to include a gas station here, which, as you can see, I actually use the vanilla toll booth asset. The reason for that was I only subscribed to one other gas station asset, and it is a Shell gas station asset. And while I definitely could have used it on this location, I already used it in the city, closer to the center of town. I built a little gas station off camera. And, you know, I didn't want to reuse the same asset multiple times. So I figured, you know, the actual toll booth asset in the game, it looks more or less like a gas station, right? Of course, it doesn't have the pumps, which I do add those later. But also, since the location from the show Dark used an actual checkpoint, which, and to some extent, is kind of like a toll booth, right? Of course, you have to stop at a checkpoint, just like you would at a toll booth. So I figured, you know, it makes sense to, you know, use that. So lastly, just finishing up the detailing here with some trucks, of course. At a truck stop, you're going to need trucks at a truck stop. I'm not really sure. There's nothing really necessarily 1980s about the actual truck trailers, since these are going to be the exact same ones I'm going to be using in the modern day. But I don't really think there's anything like that on the workshop. So, you know, it's not a super big deal again. But yeah, so that's going to be wrapping up today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. And let me know your ideas for another episode in 1986. That is, if you want to see another episode in 1986, or let me know if you want to, you know, progress to the modern day and, you know, get closer to wrapping up this series. So if you enjoyed the video, definitely give it a thumbs up. It helps out the channel a ton. And if you are new, subscribe. And I will see you all next week in another video.